Hi. I know it's a Sunday and news is certainly not on your mind, but since Parliament is on and working, I thought why not pop in and do some work myself. Imagine if one minister after another stood up in Parliament and said, there's no data for A, there's no study for B, there's no assessment for C, there's no report for X, we don't know about Y, and therefore the question doesn't arise about Z. Would that seem odd? I guess right. But in a way, that's actually what happened in the monsoon session of Parliament. Now, on day one of the monsoon session, the House reached a compromise. The government said, no questionnaire. Their reason was that because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, we can't have ministers, aides and assistants in the House, and without them, ministers can't answer questions. The opposition pushed on and a middle ground was reached. So unstarred questions were allowed. That is, MPs can ask questions but in written and receive a written reply. Now, a few days into the session that began last week, we have a few written statements. And I want to flag some and point out to a trend of sorts. When asked about economic losses in rural areas due to COVID-19, the Ministry of Rural Development said it had not carried out any assessment of it. They also said they did not conduct any study on the level of distress migration in the country, so it had nothing to share on the matter. The Labour and Employment Ministry was asked about loss of lives of migrant labourers during COVID-19. The Labour Ministry said no such data is available. The Home Ministry also said there was no mechanism in place to collect this data, so there wasn't any. Now, based on media reports, we know of at least 110 migrants who died. This, I'm sure, is a serious undercount, which is precisely why governments collect such data. So, obviously, to a question on whether any compensation or relief was provided to the family of the victims, the Labour Ministry said the question didn't arise since there was no data. The Labour Ministry also said it had not kept track of job losses during the pandemic. The Culture and Tourism Ministry was asked about how many jobs were impacted on account of COVID-19. It is evident the tourism sector is one of the worst hit during the pandemic, but the Minister of State for Culture and Tourism stated no formal study has been instituted for the assessment of impact on the tourism sector and job losses. He did though acknowledge that the word is that the industry has suffered massive loss of revenue and jobs. Now, this trend actually continues. When asked about losses suffered by the agriculture sector and by farmers amid the pandemic, the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare said no income assessment report is available. I know it feels long and repetitive, but this is actually true. A question was asked on the pandemic impacting small-scale fisheries, especially the coastal communities, and the Minister of State for Fisheries and Animal Husbandry began his answer with relaxations that were given to the fishing sector during the lockdown, and he left that question unanswered. Here's one that has been met with raised eyebrows and some amount of disappointment. Ashwini Chobe informed the House that the government had no data on the number of doctors and other healthcare workers like nurses, ASHA workers who had died during COVID-19, saying that health was a state subject. Remember all that noise we made for our frontline healthcare workers? The Indian Medical Association was understandably upset. They put out a sharply worded statement. They also said 382 doctors had lost their lives to COVID-19. This is the number the IMA put together, and they are completely certain it is a serious undercount. The last example I want to give is a slightly different one. The Ministry of Women and Child Development said there was no data to indicate that child marriages increased during the lockdown period. Non-governmental organizations like CRY and Save the Children have both said that the increase could at least be twofold. In a podcast with Suno India, they said dowry rates are lesser during a disaster or times of uncertainty. It makes parents want to marry their children off. Restrictions on gatherings means the weddings are quieter. That also becomes harder to intervene, especially when it comes to child marriages. I leave it here, but just the crux. job losses, tourism sector losses, rural economy, farmers' income, fishing sector, distress migration, death of migrants, death of healthcare workers. No study, no data, no assessment, no report. Now imagine if parliamentarians had to take the mic and say it out all loud over and over again. Do you think they'd see the trend? Also think about it, if you don't have data for some of this, how does relief look like? What is mitigation focused on? What are the priorities? I'm Anubha Bhonsle. This is Newsworthy. I count on your support. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and please find us on Instagram. Our handle is Newsworthy with AB. From our entire team, thank you for your time.